So you want to buy a Tesla. No trips to the gas station, no oil changes, a car that updates itself overnight like a phone, and outruns most sports cars off the line while doing it. It looks like the rare purchase that's actually cheaper than the alternative, the electric bill, instead of the fuel bill, and everyone around you assuming you made the smart financial choice, as well as the cool one. Subscribe before we start, because by the end of this you'll understand why the cheapest part of owning a Tesla is the part everyone talks about, and the most expensive part is the one almost nobody mentions until the bill actually arrives. Let's start with the entry price, because unlike the badge we covered a few weeks ago, Tesla's whole pitch has always been that the electric future doesn't have to be expensive. The Model 3 starts at just under $37,000 before destination and options, making it genuinely one of the more affordable ways into a new car with real performance, let alone an electric one. The Model Y, the crossover version, and Tesla's best-selling model by a wide margin, sits a little above that, and the larger Model S and Model X move into premium sedan and SUV territory, comfortably above $70,000 and $80,000 once you start adding range and performance packages. Then there's the Cybertruck, the stainless steel pickup that generated more attention than any vehicle Tesla has ever built, currently starting in the low $80,000 range once you're in a trim that most buyers actually want. On paper, every one of these looks like the financially sensible choice next to a comparable gas car. Since the electricity cost per mile is genuinely tiny, a Model 3 owner charging at home is paying somewhere around 4 cents a mile in energy, a fraction of what a gas sedan costs to fuel. That single number is the entire marketing pitch for this brand. And it's true. It's just not the whole story. So how does the actual cost of ownership flow once you own one of these? Because this is where the spreadsheet stops agreeing with the sales pitch. Depreciation is the single largest line item in owning any car, and Tesla's depreciation curve has been genuinely rough in recent years, worse in some cases than traditional gas competitors people assumed would age worse. A new Model 3 has lost somewhere between roughly 39 and 55% of its value over 5 years, depending on trim and which data source you check. And industry trackers put its 5-year value retention around 41%, which actually ranks it near the bottom of the pack among luxury and near-luxury vehicles for holding value. On a car stickering in the high 30,000s, that works out to something like $24,000 to $25,000 in pure lost value over 5 years, leaving a residual worth roughly a third of what you paid. Insurance is the second major shock for a lot of first-time Tesla buyers, and it's genuinely the heaviest single line item in the entire ownership picture for some owners, with 5-year insurance costs on a Model 3 commonly landing somewhere between $12,000 and $17,000 depending on the driver's age, location, and driving record, though shopping around aggressively between carriers can meaningfully cut that number, since rates vary enormously between insurers for the exact same car. Maintenance, to Tesla's genuine credit, is the one category where the marketing and the reality actually line up, with average annual maintenance on a Model 3 running around $237, since there's no oil to change, no transmission fluid, and far fewer moving parts than a combustion engine to eventually wear out. Put the full 5-year picture together across depreciation, insurance, financing, maintenance, and electricity, and independent cost trackers land the total somewhere around $58,000 to $85,000, depending on the model, which for the entry-level Model 3 works out to a total cost of ownership that lands remarkably close to what you'd pay owning a well-equipped Honda Accord or Toyota Camry over the same period, not the dramatically cheaper number the fuel savings alone would suggest. Now for the stuff nobody warns you about before you configure the car online. First, charging costs more than the marketing number suggests once you factor in real-world habits. Since home charging at typical residential electricity rates is genuinely cheap, but anyone relying heavily on Tesla's Supercharger network for road trips or apartment living without home charging access pays considerably more per kilowatt hour, and a driver doing significant highway charging can see their effective cost per mile climb well above the headline home charging figure. Second, tire wear is a real and underappreciated cost, since electric vehicles are heavier than comparable gas cars due to battery weight, And that extra mass, combined with instant torque, wears through tires noticeably faster than a typical sedan, meaning tire replacement shows up on the maintenance ledger more often than new owners expect. Third, insurance quotes vary wildly and unpredictably by carrier, for reasons that have little to do with the driver, since some major insurers price Tesla coverage well under $2,000 a year for a clean record driver, while others quote double that for the identical car and driver profile, which means shopping around isn't optional. It's the single easiest way to control one of the largest line items in the entire ownership picture. Fourth, repair costs when something does go wrong can be genuinely painful, since Tesla's service network is smaller and more centralized than a legacy automaker's dealer network. Body panels and battery-related repairs can be expensive and slow to source, and a minor collision that would be a quick, cheap fix on a mainstream sedan can turn into a lengthy, costly repair on a Tesla simply because of how the car is built and serviced. Fifth, and this one is specific to the current environment, federal incentives and tax credits that have historically softened the effective purchase price for many buyers have shifted and in some cases disappeared entirely, meaning the net price math that made a Tesla purchase look particularly attractive a few years ago doesn't automatically apply to a buyer signing today, and it's worth checking current eligibility rather than assuming the discount your neighbor got is still on the table. So who's actually coming out ahead owning one of these? Buyers who charge almost exclusively at home, drive a high number of miles annually, and hold the car for the full useful life of the battery come closest to realizing the fuel savings pitch the brand is built on. Since the gap between electricity and gasoline costs compounds meaningfully, the more miles you actually put on the car, which is exactly the opposite of how depreciation works, since depreciation punishes you regardless of mileage, and insurance barely cares how far you drive at all. Buyers who shop insurance aggressively across multiple carriers, rather than accepting the first quote they receive, routinely save thousands of dollars a year, since the spread between the cheapest and most expensive quote for the identical car and driver can be enormous. And buyers who choose the used market rather than new absorb someone else's depreciation instead of their own, which, exactly like the exotic car we covered a few weeks ago, is often the single smartest financial move available in this entire category. Since a Tesla that's already taken its steepest depreciation hit in the first 2 or 3 years of ownership can represent genuinely strong value for a second owner buying at a meaningfully discounted price. How do people actually lose the most money on this? Almost nobody gets burned because the car broke down constantly, or the range didn't match the window sticker. They get burned because they priced the purchase around the electricity savings alone, ignored the insurance quote until after signing, and discovered the real 5-year number only once depreciation and insurance had already eaten far more than the fuel savings ever gave back. The second common trap is financing a Cybertruck, or a fully loaded Model S, expecting the same forgiving cost curve as the entry-level Model 3, when in reality, the larger and more expensive the Tesla, the larger every one of these cost categories, insurance, depreciation, tires, and repairs, scales right alongside it. Okay, so what does a realistic year of ownership actually look like? Take a Model 3 owner charging mostly at home, driving a typical 12 to 15,000 miles a year, and holding the car the full 5 years. Total 5-year cost of ownership, all categories combined, realistically lands somewhere between $57,000 and $62,000, of which depreciation alone accounts for roughly $15,000 to $25,000, and insurance for another $12,000 to $17,000, leaving electricity and maintenance as the genuinely small line items the marketing focuses on. Now the more expensive version. A Model Y or Model X owner who finances the purchase, pays a higher insurance rate due to age or location, and does meaningful highway supercharging can see that same 5-year total climb towards $65,000 to $85,000, with the Cybertruck sitting at the very top of the range given its higher purchase price and insurance costs, one recent breakdown putting its total 5-year cost to own north of $84,000 once depreciation and out-of-pocket expenses are combined. Compare either of those numbers to a similarly priced gas alternative, and the honest conclusion most independent cost trackers reach is that a Tesla saves you real money on fuel and maintenance, costs you more on insurance, and lands within striking distance of a comparable gas car once everything is totaled, rather than delivering the dramatic overall savings the sticker and the spec sheet alone would suggest. So yeah, you can buy a Tesla and genuinely save money every time you charge it, instead of filling it up. Most buyers discover the real total cost only after the first insurance renewal and the first depreciation-driven trade-in quote land in the same year, and realize the fuel savings they budgeted around were only ever one line on a much longer spreadsheet. The ones who come out ahead aren't the ones who bought the biggest battery or the flashiest trim. They're the ones who shopped insurance like it mattered as much as the sticker price, because in this business, it usually does. Subscribe, and we'll do this again next week with the next machine that sells you a feeling.